So hello and good morning everyone, and warmly welcome to the second day of the Aboagora Symposium. The sun is shining and we have a wonderful day ahead of us. My name is Astrid Huopalainen. I work at Åbo Academy University and I'm also part of the organizing committee. And now it's my pleasure and my delight to introduce our AGORA keynote speaker, Dean and Professor Hanna Johansson. Hanna Johansson is an art historian who currently works as Dean of the Academy of Fine Arts, University of the Arts in Helsinki. She is also a professor of contemporary art research at the Academy of Fine Arts and an adjunct professor at the University of Helsinki. Contemporary art and its ecological dimensions, as well as conceptual art, are at the heart of Professor Johansson's expertise. Recently, Professor Johansson has written on the representation of air, as well as about the representation of weather in the visual arts. She has published widely on contemporary art and artists in Finland and beyond. She has also held several positions of trust in society. Professor Johansson's talk today is entitled "The Real and Imaginary Breeze, Air in the Visual Arts." Warmly welcome.
Thank you, Astrid, for the kind words. And yes, I first want to thank you for the organizers for inviting me to this wonderful event. I never have been here before in Aboagora, but the reputation has reached me before this year, so I'm very honored to be here. So, yeah, my title is Real and Imaginary Breeze, Air in the Visual Arts. And I have, how many? Four parts in this in my lecture. And I start with a short introduction. In 2012, visitors to Document 13 in Kassel, one of the most, or perhaps the most important contemporary art exhibition in the world, experienced an odd phenomenon in the entrance hall of the main exhibition venue, Frederikianum. This hall and the adjacent exhibition spaces were empty. Because the exhibition leaflet said there is an artwork in these rooms, curious viewers move inquiringly around the big empty spaces. Every now and then they notice a gust of air, slightly stronger than that produced by a normal fan. The artwork was that moving air that gently pushed and pulled the visitors through the clean white rooms. The work in question, "I need some meaning I can memorize," The Invisible Pull, by the British artist Ryan Gander, raise some important and interesting themes to which I wish to draw your attention today. A breeze or a wind is normally a natural phenomenon, but in Gander's work, it is anything but natural. Instead, it was technologically produced, the result of a long planning process. Further, the work was connected to life outside the art world in the sense that it alluded to the air conditioning, which on the hot summer day is present and tangible in many public and private interior spaces all over the world, and more needed also in Finland due to climate warming. In Kassel, in this case, the point was not air conditioning, but an installation artwork that disturbed the border between the natural and the artificial, as well as the border between art and non-art. I was interested in why such a fragile and almost invisible element, which emphasizes the act of breathing, has become so prevalent in contemporary art in the last decade. When I began studying air in art history, it soon became obvious for me that air and wind has been depicted in various ways in the history of art, but not in an explicit way as a leading motif of the work of art, as in many recent eminent works that activate viewers to play with the air, to play with the wind, and to play with each other. Like in this Danish-Icelandic artist Olafur Eliasson's Weather in Weather work from 2016. Veiret, sää säässä, weather in weather, takes the form of a large vertical ring positioned along the north-south axis of Oddrupgard Kunstpark. A special weather vane detects the direction of the wind. Whenever the wind changes direction, the ring emits a gust of fog into the park through a series of 36 jets that are spaced equally around the circumference of the ring. In any work of art displayed outdoors, or in outdoors, yes, the weather is, is the invisible, unspoken element. In Eliasson's work embraces the invisible element, making the wind, the atmosphere, and the air in which we live explicit. Even when the wind is not blowing, the work exists in the state of potentiality. So, part one, about air and some words about air and climate change. Yes, I first want to contextualize a bit more my presentation. The threat of global warming has recently risen to the forefront of political, ecological, scientific, artistic, and humanistic discourse and action around the world. The debate revolves around two core issues. First, how we are to reduce carbon dioxide emissions to prevent temperatures from rising beyond the decisive 1.5 degrees, defined as a safe limit of climate change. The second issue, which ominously underlines the first, is even deeper source of concern. Is it even possible to sustain human life on this planet, particularly in the form that we enjoy it today? I argue that in order to nurture and safeguard safeguard life on Earth, we must identify modes of representation that allow the claim of life to be made, seen and heard. This idea proposed by philosopher and gender theorist Judith Butler links together representation and survival. In short, what we recognize as valuable is interrelated with the claim of life being made perceptible as a thing of value, as something worthy of preservation. This might be one of the reasons why climate, weather, and air-related events and fluctuations have become more tangible in recent years, both in art and humanities, as well as in media. Butler's ideas about making visible the claim of life are difficult to apply to global warming, however. It is far easier, for example, to comprehend the value of a plant or animal under immediate threat of extinction. With climate, the issue is more complicated. Not only is climate a more abstract entity than an insect, for example, or an animal or a plant, it is also omnipresent. And its core material component, the atmosphere, is virtually invisible, yet ubiquitous. With this in mind, indeed, all who work with any form of representation have a special responsibility to make visible those living beings and life-sustaining entities that are otherwise invisible to the human eye, but what we appreciate and To consider the menace of global warming in relation to its representation, we find that life-sustaining representations are tied to the past and to historical readings of reality that have shaped the present into what it is today. In other words, human history has defined the terms and limits of our experience, and thereby also our expectations of the future. For example, what comes to climate. Recognizing a valuable claim of life, therefore, necessitates negotiation between past experience, past horizons of possibility, and anticipation of future events to improve our ability to read and comprehend them, and also perhaps past representations. We may have gone astray in our construals of air, the key material agent of the climate. Humanity, perhaps, chose the wrong path by becoming enamored with all that is solid, weighty, and perceptible with the senses. What if, at the hypothetical beginning, we had looked more carefully at the things that are difficult to see, at everything that exists in the form that is not visible or tangible as a solid object or piece of matter? We would perhaps have been nurslings of the air, as one suggested by the early Romantic philosopher Johann Gottfried Herder. Similar argument is made in the early 1980s by the feminist philosopher Luz Irigaray, who wrote about the forgetting of air in her book published with the name of Oubli d'air chez Martin Heidegger, Forgetting Forgetting of Air with Martin Heidegger. She was not referring to global warming, but targeting her critique at the exclusion of woman in metaphysics by excluding air. She described how the Western metaphysical tradition disregarded air and focused instead on solid, wavy matter. Irigaray writes brilliantly on the subject of air. She describes it as an element of openness, expansiveness, and light. She observes how it unites everything, transcending of the world of forms and phenomena. Yet nothing could exist without it. Air is the origin and destination of all things, without itself demanding to be located anywhere. According to Irigaray, it is a founding structure, but it cannot be a structure, for it is constantly moving, yet simultaneously static. It rarely makes itself detachable, perhaps in the wind, he says, except in wind, she says. Also, according to Irigaray, she realized that air is also a democratic element in that it unites all living beings through the act of breathing or inhalation. Because air almost never manifests itself as a presence, Western philosophy, or at least Martin Heidegger, has thought air as a void, an absence, nothingness. But because air moves freely, edgeless, and unfettered, it takes nothing, but it gives generously of itself to others. And indeed, others take abundantly. Air performs a great variety of enabling functions. The first of these relates to the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Here, air performs the function of sustaining and carrying life. In history, air has performed its critical services for humanity, enabling various technical inventions such as coal, steam, and fossil power. Just name a few. These inventions have in turn enabled the advances lifestyle we enjoy in the modern world, leading to the advent of concepts such as the Anthropocene and fossil capitalism. Physically, the word air denotes the layers of gas that constitute the Earth's atmosphere. It is one of the four classical elements, but it materializes only fleetingly in the form of wind, ever-shifting clouds, fog and smoke, light. It seems paradoxical to think that despite its immateriality, air is the most natural thing in the world. It refuses to bow to the laws of economic exchange, for example. Air can also be described as something that transcends modern control and the laws of perspective. Not only it has been thought to be impervious to historical and cultural change, it is also considered to be unaffected by human labor and production. Even so, or perhaps for this reason, air has always had metaphorical power. So we can ask, would our lot be different today had we learned to see air from the very outset? Would society have taken a different path? Would communities, economics, politics, and art have evolved differently? Is the current ecological emergency the upshot of our having forgotten air, the element that makes the least noise about itself? I will now elaborate these questions by tracing the element of air in the history of art, and my focus is, as I have promised, on the wind and how wind has been made visible or tangible in the different historical moments, but I also talk how the air has changed its role during time in art. So, part 2. Wind, air made visible. Ryan Gander's work that I talked at the beginning was hard to represent and hard to get pictures of. The work was neither visual nor visible. The only way to catch the work in visual representation was to look at the viewer's hair or clothes moving. The source of the air current in the exhibition space was also invisible and unknown, and visitors were searching for the source of the breeze, but without success. Because it seemed clear that there was an external cause for the breeze in the exhibition hall, the moving air became a sort of a fantasy or technological mystery for the viewers, where you couldn't find an answer because it wasn't visible or it was a secret. In this regard, Gander's work evoked art historical associations. Namely, wind or breeze has been a subject of art at least since the early Renaissance, or even much earlier, since Aristoteles wrote his Meteorological. It has been studied in Western world. Yet, according to art historian George Didi Uberman, this subject was not seen until the 1890s, when German art historian Abi Warburg made it into art historical subject in his dissertation on Sandro Botticelli's Birth of Venus and Spring or Primavera. Antiquity was a frequent source of inspiration for early Italian Renaissance art, also here. Abi Warburg has placed air and wind at the center of major exploration of Renaissance art in the 1890s. Already as a young student, he realized the epic wind that blows in Gilberti's relief, especially on David's panel. What you see here, the wind is, otherwise it's quite calm, the landscape, and it's not really a windy day, but the wind blows around Saul. Wind swirls around Saul, drives him to insanity. Actually, the association between madness and wind are often used in several occasions. Many ancient doctrines believed that several diseases, both physical and mental, were caused by the entry of winds into the body. Where the burst of wind entered that course through the body, it causes many kinds of symptoms, from epilepsy to apoplexy, which can be cured only when the air leaves the patient. One of Abi Warburg's inventive considerations that he made in his dissertation concerned the meaning of wind in Renaissance paintings. He realized that breeze or wind was used to make fluidity of depicted bodies visual. body, surfaces, and air must see together, like in the three graces in Botticelli's Primavera. There we see the draperies of the graces in the wind, as the wind is in the draperies, in the hair and around the body. Warburg shifts the focus from the still beauty of Venus to the turbulent edges of her body. Okay, here, if you don't know the characters here, in the bird of Venus at the left, there is the wind god Zephyrus who blows at the Venus. Yeah, and with the wind shown by lines radiating from his mouth. He is in the air and carries a young female who is also blowing, but less forcefully. And already in Renaissance time, it was Giorgio Vasari who said, who argued that there is a kind of relation between aura and this person as an aura, and there is a connection between aura and this person and the lighter breeze. And they are joint efforts are aiming to blow Venus towards the shore. So back to Abi Warburg. His elaborations made us see that the wind does not just pass over things in the painting, but profoundly touches the things it passes over so that they are transformed and metamorphosed. Warburg reinvented our way of seeing Renaissance art by placing both Didi Uberman bodily motion and the displacement of affects at the center of perception. Quote end. Warburg speaks about wind as an imaginary breeze and an external cause of or force on the image. However, when you study in more detail about the source of the breeze, you will realize that it's not evident what causes the wind, where does it come from. So partly the figures are in the wind, but otherwise the landscape is quite calm here as well. In Renaissance art, wind was a supernatural phenomenon. And when it appeared in an image, it did not necessarily involve the whole skein of a painting, but only certain figures or a part of the whole. This spatial incoherence was characteristic of early Renaissance painting, such as Botticelli's Primavera, where wind has a functional meaning. It sways and shakes and touches. The power of the wind gave paintings forms that touched the viewers as well. Warburg called this the pathos formel, a form that evokes pathos, that is deep feeling. Mobilizing air became a vehicle for mediating pathos feeling. But air in the form of wind also causes movement through time and permeates and induces pathos in the depicted bodies. So in the depicted bodies as well as in the viewers. As has become already evident, in Renaissance art, air was not understood as a natural element that everyone breathes and that is necessary for life, but rather as an individual style, fantasy, and spirit, anima. Soul, that is the other word for soul, especially irrational part of the soul. This indicates a correspondence between an inner and outer mood, or temper, which culminates in the connection between weather and a state of mind. This is also the case with the notion of atmosphere, since it has this double meaning as well of both air and mood. Didi Uberman recognizes that in Botticelli's Primavera and Venus, form and intensity combine in the gestures of the graces and the subtle elevation of the airy. This he calls corporeal velocity, and it falls under the category of phantoms, phantasma. In suspending immobility and motion, the dancer in Botticelli's Primavera must suddenly become a phantasmal shadow, ombra phantasmatica. It means that dancers escape gravity and their earthly conditions. In Renaissance, air alluded also to the atmosphere in a sense of the spirit of a place. Thus, Giorgio Vasari could attribute the revival and success of the arts and artists in Florence to the influence of air on the spirit of paintings and painters. This tradition or belief for the correspondence between inner mind and outer world or landscape and atmosphere was long-lasting. Still, at the beginning of the 19th century, Carl Gustav Carus defined the main task of landscape art as representing a certain mood through the depiction of a corresponding mood in the life of nature. Later, this kind of ideas that saw the correspondence between people's character, place, and climate were connected to national socialism and racism and were deemed suspicious for a long time, and perhaps still. Although in Renaissance Florence, wind was recognized as an external cause of the image, it was not regarded as an element or an important part of the life outside art. Still, I argued that there are common denominators between the understanding of air in the Renaissance and its understanding in contemporary art. So, and that is, air has a power over visible things. In the art of the 15th century, air or wind revealed nudity, motion, and intimacy of bodies. And in Ryan Gunder's contemporary installation, the breezy air made visible viewers pay attention to other viewers, so that at some moments, as we saw in the, maybe in the video, the work created a sudden accidental community in the Frederikianum exhibition halls. The breath of the wind affected the viewers and their relationship with each other, and so created a kind of community, temporary community. So now I move on to my part, is it to the second or third? And it's, I would say, the next part, early period of scientific sky. So since the Renaissance, air has appeared in several ways in the visual arts, and it has had several functions and roles. But as I said earlier, it never has been a kind of leading motive. But one of the significant changes happened at the beginning of the 19th century, and I will now stop for a while for the beginning of the 19th century, when the heaven kind of religious heaven became sky, and empirical sciences developed. The sky was now to be considered a real thing, that is a natural phenomenon which could be explored as a scientific object. Eventually, along with the development of laboratory sciences, atmosphere were to be seen as a vast chemical laboratory, and this affected on the representation of the air and its phenomena. In England, one of the dominant figures was a chemist, an amateur meteorologist, Luke Howard, who formed the new science of meteorology. He argued that climate works according to laws and that it could be understood historically. He developed hephrology, that is a system of clouds, that he first presented as a paper on the modifications of clouds. And this hephrology is, I've understood that it's still in use. I mean, the basic structure is still valid and in use. So this first stage scientific development of meteorology became important to the artist like John Constable, who thought that painting was comparable to science. Particularly interesting are Constable cloud studies painted in Hampstead near London in 1821 and 1822. These quite small cloud sketches consist of dozens of small, accurate oil studies of clouds and the sky made plein air, that is outdoors, in front of the landscape, in the landscape. He made study on heavenly events and changes in weather and sky during the day. Here you can see wind that roll on the landscape and makes dramatic phenomena in sky. And yeah, there are lots of these, and they are really, really, really beautiful and wonderful, quite abstract, between abstract and representative, figurative. So, but this is only one example. Yeah, and on the back side of the painting, he always write the time and a day and the weather conditions of the moment he painted the painting. So of Constable contemporaries, for example, David Cox was a painter who depicted especially the effect of the wind on landscape. Here, one old lady and a dog tried to move on in the windy landscape, open landscape. There was, and perhaps still is going on, a dispute about whether Constable was a realistic painter that disregarded his inner life, or whether his paintings carry and awaken emotions. According to his diary, he is able to connect and unite these two aims, scientific accuracy and emotional interpretation. This is now one example from the Constable's diary, where this becomes evident. Quote, "Nature is never seen, in this climate at least, to greater perfection than about 9 o'clock in the morning of July and August. And it is still more delightful if vegetation has been refreshed with a shower during the night." Quote end. Of his contemporaries, William Turner, in his turn, painted dramatic scenes on sky and storms and other events in the air that are seemingly very emotional and even furious, like in this example here. Later in 1880s, these are the early part of 19th century. But later, a little bit later, in 1880s, John Ruskin, the first dominant writer on art in England and a defender of Turner's art, had a lot to say about atmosphere and air. Ruskin held 2 lectures with the title, The Storm Cloud of the 19th Century, which topic was foggy gloom that he attributed simultaneously to coal-burning pollution and moral lassitude. Ruskin argued for art that was based on the observation of nature. He, however, pursued for art that sees the truth that goes beyond observational accuracy to reveal emotional truth. So, beyond observational accuracy to reveal emotional truth. Also, his understanding of atmosphere consists of this double meaning, defined by science as a gaseous envelope around the Earth, and the figurative meaning, feeling or ambience of one's surroundings. Ruskin wanted, with his 2 lectures in London Institution in February 1884, to, quote, bring to notice a series of cloud phenomena, quote end. Yeah. In his lecture, he stated, this is quote again, I first notice the definite character of this wind and of the clouds it brings with it in the year of 1871. And here is one of his own made paintings of this so-called storm cloud or thunder cloud from the early, so it cannot be actually is, but it's, yeah. So it's not, sorry, this is not a storm cloud he's talking about in his lectures. In his lectures, however, he used apocalyptic language and identified black clouds. Quote, the sky is covered with gray cloud, not a rain cloud, but a dry black veil, which no ray or sunshine can pierce. And now I come to the most important sign of the black wind and the black cloud, that in bringing on their peculiar darkness, they blanch the sun instead of reddening it. So Ruskin's storm cloud consists of damp air mixed with smoke. It comprises of poisonous smoke due to, this is quote again from Ruskin, at least 200 furnace chimneys in a square of 2 miles on each side of me. And then, quote, and he adds that it appears to be, quote, made of dead men's souls, quote end. And thus he replaces the scientific explanation for a theological one, as Polly Gold explains. So we're back to heaven from the sky. According to her, for Ruskin, the dark skies of the black clouds signify moral gloom, blasphemy of science, and the wrongness of scientific method. What is interesting here is that Ruskin's storm cloud attributed the cause of these clouds to people, or Ruskin did it, attributed the cause of these clouds to people, so they were human-derived. So John Ruskin frequently argued that the combined effects of science and self-interested economic motives in the consequence of the ravaged natural environment. For Ruskin, the Blake wind that he writes of in his storm cloud lecture seems to be a direct consequence of the scientific investigations that had treated the natural environment as an object to exploit. This means that pollution, the natural environment, robbing our common right to blue sky, according to Ruskin. So it was because of scientists, according to Ruskin. Ruskin paid attention to the polluted air, but this was not the first time humans had endangered their survival by polluting the atmosphere. The ancient Romans had already complained of the so-called heavy heavens caused by excessive wood burning. Indeed, the harmful atmospheric impacts of fossil combustion have been evident since early history. Medieval London was so dangerously polluted that Edward I outlawed the burning of sea coal in the city. His ban was ignored, just as numerous successive attempts to restrict coal burning at various times in history have failed to rein in air pollution. Coal burning caused such widespread pollution in 19th century Europe that a new word was coined around 1905 to describe its impact in England cities, Britain's cities. Right. Smog, a portmanteau of smoke and fog. London pea souper was made famous by James Whistler and Claude Monet paintings, in which the thick, foggy air created a special atmosphere hanging over the city. The smoke was portrayed not as something deadly or suffocating, but as an aesthetically evocative visual experience. So only later was the pea souper associated with air pollution, which Ruskin already foresees. So it is quite surprising that the links between air and modern art theory have not been recognized to the extent they deserved until perhaps only recently, with theorists gradually waking up to the need for a critical evaluation of the history of air and the atmosphere. This may be because we tend to dwell upon all these heavy and solid, rather than things weightless that elude our perception, as theorized by Luz Irigaray. So, if air is a foundationless forgotten by metaphysics, it has certainly breathed life into modern art theory, if we looked more carefully, or study it more carefully. Both the philosophers Theodor Adorno and Walter Benjamin actually have paid already attention on this element, but from a little bit different angle. Walter Benjamin describes an aura, the notion that we all know, as a tremor or sigh of nature, as something that we literally breathe. Benjamin's description chimes well with the original Greek and Latin meanings of aura, gentle breeze or breath, as he was referring not to a human-made artwork, but to object of nature, evoking the romantic trope of distance when encountering natural beauty. Even so, the aura can be seen as a special tremor that animates an artwork, a subtle emanation like a breath or breeze. The aura, for Benjamin, is something untouched by humans and culture. It is in the image something that is untouched by humans and culture, but is a surplus of human and culture in the artwork. Untouched by humans and culture. It might be the mark of time, or perhaps the touch of authenticity, where authenticity implies something external that cannot be controlled, shaped, contained, or grasped rationally. Thus, a breath of fresh air is a phrase describing an experience of natural aesthetic beauty or a joyful moment of spiritual refreshment. Despite the known and acknowledged sensed and suffered problems associated with air today, people still tend to regard air quite often, I would say, regard air as life's backdrop rather than as an explicit condition of survival that should be nurtured and valued. So I'm actually heading toward the end of the presentation. So this is a kind of end chapter. Today, we are living our, I would say, meteorological moment. We face a struggle to survive and preserve our very lives, our ecological systems, natural scenery, and culture. When Irigaray wrote her Forgetting the Air with Martin Heidegger, she addressed the heavy legacy of Western metaphysics primarily in terms of gender exclusion. The tone was different in the article describing urban air pollution as a crime against humanity that she wrote with the philosopher Michael Marder in the article that was published in The Guardian in 2014. The polluted air that leaves a bitter aftertaste in big cities is no longer just a metaphor, like perhaps here, allegory, symbol, or semiotic marker, as air perhaps used to be. Today, air is simply the physical substance upon which we all depend. Irigaray and Marder urge readers to learn to respect life by emulating the vegetal world, which silently pledges its loyalty to life, including the lives of others. Plants and forests not only produce oxygen, but even purify contaminated air in doing so. Expanding on Irigaray and Marder, I would further contend that not only we do need to understand what we might lose, that we might lose life-sustaining air and our life-enabling climate, but also the fact that air sustains everything that makes our lives worth living. What we are seeing today is that when air is artifactualized, it destroys all, artifactualized like we are living in our Anthropocene period when everything, also air is artifactualized, it's not anymore kind of natural. It destroys all the things that modern culture, according to Adorno, according to Heidegger, or according to Benjamin and so forth. So modern culture traditionally associated with it. Absence or externality, boundlessness, freedom, and joy in life. Ultimately, the present meteorological moment has forced us to confront the fact that there is no such thing as a natural place that exists beyond modernity. So we can no longer, as before, step out into the open and fill our lungs with the clean air without thinking of this long history of fossil fuels and coal burning and climate change. So I want to end my presentation with two works that I think crystallize both the moment we are right now and how this moment brings together the two sides of the wind that we have learned from the history of art. The external atmospheric wind in nature and the intimate bodily breeze that we are dependent on. The other work is made quite recently in 2018 by Gloria Lauterbach, and it is still, I think, outside Aalto University in Otaniemi, outside Väre building. It tells and reminds us about climate change and about worsening storms and winds we are supposed to face in the near future.
Kreuzstraße is a replica of a part of a copper roof that was ripped off a church in Zurich, Switzerland in 2015 by Storm Nicholas. It left chaos behind, was a threat to its surrounding and entangled others. As fast as it came, it also vanished again, was efficiently being removed. At Väre, I would like the replica to function as a temporary monument that alters, continues its growth, interweaves with its surrounding and unfolds its built-in forces. Make a copy of like a storm sculpted roof piece and maybe also discuss them or to exhibit event that has happened at a different place than at Väre, but is like has changed its place and shows or unfolds its new strength there.
Yes, and this is the one end, the external wind, and the other work I want to show you is originally made a little bit earlier by Maria Virkkala in first time in 1990s or 1990s, but then remade a couple of times in. So that the last one was, I don't remember, a couple of years ago. And it is a visual trace about the minimum possible life-sustaining gesture, breath of air. And in this case, the work makes visible very clearly and simply the interconnection between our breathing, the breath of air, inhaling and exhaling, and carbon dioxide it or we produce. So it's not video, but some images in the process when Maria is making the work. It's a very old charcoal dust that she's blowing on the screen that eventually transform from the white to the black. So, and it's like a film screen, the size is film screen, and it is surrounded by the this day's newspaper, local newspaper pages. So this work has many meanings, and here we see the next steps from the work, and then the final version that is on the wall, dream screen, made by blowing very old charcoal dust, only breathing the charcoal dust on the wall and making the gesture of breathe visible, and also the visible the carbon dioxide that we are producing. And so we are so urgently struggling with it. So thank you.